I saw an article just the other day in the latest edition of the Epic Times, and it involved education. Education, of course, has been one of my fields of interest, and so the article caught my attention, and the article is entitled that Obama era policy is fueling a school discipline crisis. And it involves the socialistic practice called restorative justice. This is something about which I've written extensively in the past. I've put out articles on it, but I think it's interesting to notice some things regarding it. So I wanted to look at the article for a moment. Then we'll go to Texas. We'll come to Texas where I am, and we'll look at how restorative justice, which is really a socialistic practice, is being implemented and has been implemented for a long time in the state of Texas and other states as well. But what is restorative justice? Restorative justice is basically a socialistic program by which we're going to redistribute the punishments, in this case, punishments between minority children and those of the majority. That is, basically, just break it down. We're going to say, okay, we have to have so many blacks and browns and whites of equal distribution being punished in the juvenile justice system, or suspension rates. It has to be equal between all the races, and that's basically restorative justice. So restorative justice is what has been preached, and it, of course, was inaugurated, first of all, in the Obama era, 2009 through 2018 or so. But in 2014, Obama and the Justice Department came out and they basically said, if you have a disproportionate number of blacks in the school district who are being suspended, then you're going to be punished with removal of tax dollars, and we're going to put federal pressure on that school to get them to reverse all those trends. All of that ignores really the issues at hand. But let's just notice, first of all, the article. This is from the Epic Times just the other day, and then we'll notice some other things regarding it. David Rain presumed that punishment would follow after a bully on the school bus shoved his middle school-aged son around, ordered him where to sit, broke his glasses. Months later, after learning that 3 other students had received the same treatment at the school in upstate New York, Rain was told that the tormentor got a free pass under the school's restorative justice policies. According to Rain, his son never received an apology. They swept it under the rug, he said. The school district is in Newburgh, New York. It's among more than 1,450 school districts, serving about 19 million students across all 50 states that use restorative justice practices. These numbers are drawn from district websites, Defunding Education, an organization that tracks left-leaning policies in public education. But the primary goal of restorative justice practices is to, quote, reduce suspension rates for Black and Hispanic students. An article on restorative justice in the Journal of the National Education Association states that traditional disciplinary policies, quote, often are nourished by implicit biases and institutionalized racism. Let's just stop here for a moment. Basically, since there is a disproportionate amount of minorities that are punished in the school system, that is going to juvenile justice or simply being suspended from the classroom, the assumption is that that means we have systemic racism. That's the assumption. That's how we're going to operate. And that's what's going on in our culture right now. And that is, no one wants to question whether or not that is an accurate assumption or not. They don't want to talk about the assumption. We don't want to uncover that assumption. We're just going to assume that a disproportionate amount of blacks in, for example, the prison system is indicative of white racism. And that's why they say, well, we have systemic racism. And you can't go into question it. Not going to talk about whether or not it may be the black culture, it may be the minority culture in the Hispanic community that are causing some of these problems, but no, we're not going to talk about that. It is simply a school to prison pipeline, and that's the assumption of it. And that's exactly what the National Education Association is all about. By the way, this is a great reason why Donald Trump needs to dismantle destroy the NEA because it is a socialistic program. We'll talk more about that as we go along here. Let's go back to the Rain family. Like many parents, Rain was not even aware that his son's school has such policies, much less that they have been advocated widely throughout the country. He didn't even know that. You see, Obama mandated the schools do this, and this is done right here in North Texas. We're going to call this the buckle of the Bible Belt. This is exactly what is being done in our own school systems in North Texas. So Rain says, I can understand a get-out-of-jail-free card for a first offense, but if it happens over and over and over again, it's not restorative. It's abuse to society. President Trump targeted such policies earlier this year in an executive order that states that the government will no longer tolerate risks to children from school discipline based on discriminatory and unlawful equity ideology. The practices found their way into school policies almost 2 decades ago, became tied to federal funding during the Obama administration. So what is it? Restorative justice is nothing less than social justice. What is social justice? It is socialism. That's what it is. It's redistributing the monies, redistributing the abilities of people to go up the ladder socially, or we should say in a business. It is, and in this case, restorative practices referring to punishment practices that are being implemented in counties and in the school systems. All of it has to be on an equal basis. So in other words, they basically tell you, if you have, for example, 40% black in your school system and 60% white, but we have 60% blacks that are being put in juvenile justice system and only 40% whites. Something's wrong, and that means that you are, or the school system is systemically racist. I absolutely and flatly deny such a proposition and such an assumption. And you know what? They don't want anybody to question it, because they don't want anybody saying, well, you know what? The problem is the black family. The problem is the black culture. That's what's going on. They don't want to say that. So it's going to say, well, the only reason that we have more blacks or Hispanics incarcerated or in the juvenile justice system is, well, because you're systemically racist. That's got to be the reason. And that's the underlying assumption. As a matter of fact, let me just give you the scenario. So in school districts in North Texas, they have mandatory suspension or mandatory juvenile justice or mandatory where they put in a juvenile justice system, mandatory, and then they have discretionary. So a mandatory suspension, that is suspending from the classroom, suspending from the school, and a discretionary suspension. The mandatory would be, of course, you violate the law. That is just, you bring a gun to school, okay, you're going to go to juvenile justice, all right. But there are discretionary removals from the classroom, and those discretionary removals are such things as an out-of-control kid in the classroom, 2 or 3 out-of-control kids. How about a kid cursing in the classroom? How about a kid telling the teacher that they're going to beat them up, or tell them, or being ugly to the teacher, and keeping the classroom in turmoil and chaos? How about that? No, that's not a violation of the law. They might just continue to laugh and carry on and push each other around and have fun and make it impossible to teach in a classroom. But that would not be a mandatory removal from the class because they have not violated the law. So they say, okay, in the discretionary removals, taking them to the juvenile justice system, or actually it would be in the suspension rates into an alternative education system, that has to be on a quota system. That's what is going on right here in North Texas. That's what's going on all over our country, and it is causing chaos in the classroom. Well, there are a lot of different school districts that this article in the Epic Times mentions. One of the websites is We Are Teachers, and they tell us this is a We Are Teachers website actually is in favor of restorative justice. It's a national organization that provides free resources to schools, defines restorative justice as a practice based on empathy, respect, accountability that encourages students to understand the impact of their actions, take responsibility, and actively participate in the healing process. In other words, we're not going to suspend the student. Of course, they're not going to paddle the student anymore either. So we're just going to have a talking circle in which you're all going to get together. So let's just say here's a black senior boy, and he's been harassing, let's say, a freshman white girl, sexually harassing her, saying statements. We're not going to do anything with that, except we're going to get them all together and talk about it, and have the school counselor come in and say, "No, why are you harassing this young girl? And will you like to?" I will tell my daughter, you don't need to go to that. That is not what I want you to. No, you don't need to go face that person. That's exactly what they're doing. But that is ridiculous. And this is why the schools are out of control. Restorative justice practices. Well, the article goes on and on. It's in California, it's in Florida, it's in Texas, New York City. There's so many illustrations of it. Epic Times article, the last issue. So let's just go to Texas here. Let's come to Texas and talk about it from the standpoint of the juvenile justice system and an organization in Texas called Texas Appleseed. Texas Appleseed bills itself as an Austin-based public interest justice center to change unjust laws and policies involving juvenile justice. Specifically, the nonprofit organization wants to dismantle unjust laws that unduly burden, and get this, historically undeserved Texans. I wonder who they mean by historically undeserved Texans. That is simply to say that minority children are being punished at a higher rate than white children. That's all they're saying here. But they're assuming, that is an assumption, that it is all because of racism in the systemic racism in the white schools. That is absolutely an affront. That is not what's happening. Here's a letter sent to the Dallas ISD. This was several years ago, and Texas Appleseed wrote this. According to the data from the Texas Education Agency, 6,800 black students and 5,900 Latinx students were suspended out of school from the Dallas Independent School District during the 2018-2019 school year, as compared to only 363 white students. Okay, so we have 6,000 black students, almost 6,000 Latinx students, actually 6,800 black students, almost 7,000. Almost 6,000 Latinx students, but 363. Okay, wow. All right, Texas Appleseed said, wow, there you got it. There you have it. Okay, the disparity proves one thing, people who are socialistic in their mind, and that means we are systemically racist. The reason that they're being suspended at higher rates is because the white teachers are racist. Black students, it is pointed out, represented, according to the article, 22.6% of the DISD student population, yet they accounted for 46.7% of the out-of-school suspension. This disparity is enough supposedly to prove that the educational and juvenile justice systems are systemically racist against minorities. Now, to enhance this charge, the Texas Appleseed freely and frequently invokes the specter of George Floyd, death at the hands of the police. Boy, that was all about racism. It's all about racism. Nothing to do with a large black man that was on drugs and out of control. Nothing to do with that. Nothing to do with the man who was on the other side of the law. But it had everything to do with racism. Not to justify his death, but it's simply to point out, you can't make a hero of George Floyd. He was a thug. And he was on the wrong side of the law. But anyway, they bring that up. Then you have JDAI, that is Juvenile Detention Alternative System. The JDAI program is sponsored by and championed by the Annie E. Casey Foundation. The Annie E. Casey Foundation, by the way, is found on Texas Appleseed websites and materials. So what is the Annie E. Casey Foundation? Well, its consultant was, a few years ago, Bart Labow. I don't know, I haven't followed it this year, but Bart Labow is a former member of the SDS, Students for Democratic Society. That is a communist organization in the 1960s. And like other Marxist-oriented agitators, Labow, through the JDAI program, will, quote, require states to work to reduce the disproportionate representation of minority juveniles in secured facilities. What's the problem? Too many minorities are being punished because of white racism. The solution? Revamp the detention and incarceration procedures as well as school suspension policies and make them along social justice lines. So how do you like that? That is, same thing as redistributing money, but we're going to redistribute the punishment now. That's what it is. What is social justice? That's what this is all about. Restorative justice is social justice. Social justice has nothing to do with real justice. It focuses attention on outcomes. Social justice advocates cry continually about unequal distribution of properties, money, college degrees, and even jail sentences. And now school discipline is to be meted out on the basis of racial quotas. The late Walter Williams observed regarding social justice, by the way, he was a black columnist, a great columnist. He pointed out, quote, outcomes of human relationships are often seen as criteria for the presence or absence of justice or fairness. Let's just read that again. That is exactly what's going on here. Outcomes of human relationships are often seen as criteria for the presence or absence of justice or fairness. That is, outcomes such as how many kids are incarcerated in juvenile justice, how many kids are in alternative education, how many blacks versus whites are in the judicial, or rather in the incarcerated in the justice system today. How many? How many whites do you have on a scale that has financial wealth compared to blacks? All of that. Okay, so how many outcomes of human relationships seen as criteria for the presence or absence of justice or fairness? Continue with Williams. Outcomes frequently used as barometers of justice and fairness are race and sex statistics on income and unemployment, income distribution in general, occupation distribution, wealth ownership, other measures of socioeconomic status. End of quote. In other words, no attention at all is going to be paid to the underlying reason for differences among people of different races. Social justice simply assumes that the different outcomes among people is the result of crass prejudices, favoritism, and white racism. This is exactly the unspoken assumption of Texas Appleseed. What social justice and Texas Appleseed warriors refuse to consider is that differences in behavior among races, or even among subcultures, is more the result of diverse habits, personal choices, cultural preferences, and moral values that are instilled in the home. Texas Appleseed has got it wrong. Restorative justice is wrong. It's not the school to prison pipeline. It is a home to prison pipeline. The only way that you're going to get better in the minority communities is to change the home. But the home is not going to be changed without the gospel of Jesus Christ impacting husbands and wives together. That's exactly the truth. Just as an example, out-of-wedlock birth rates for different racial and ethnic groups in 2008 was just over 40%. The breakdown of that statistic shows that among white, non-Hispanic women, out-of-wedlock birth rate was 28.6%. Hispanics, however, was 52.5%. Blacks, it jumped to almost 75%. That was 2008. Is that due to racism? Is it due to systemic racism among the white community? No, we know what it is. It is lack of morality that is in the subculture of America, in the minority cultures. Consider abortion. 2005, the ratio abortion rate for blacks in the United States was almost 5 times that for white women. Similar disparities are found in almost every measurable statistic. It is clearly evident that minority cultures are fostering immoral lifestyles to an alarming degree. That's what's going on, but we don't want to talk about that. We want to say that because now all of a sudden, oh, you're making everybody angry. We just cannot look at the real problem. This is how sin operates on a person. It's how sin operates in a church, in a family, in a community. And that is, we refuse to look at the real cause. We simply say it's all about racism. When in point of fact, it's not about that at all. In these cases, it's referring to, or actually points back to, a subcultural problem. Yes, Texas Appleseed wants us to believe it's all about white racism, but that is not the case. It is about subcultures, minority cultures in America, and in Texas specifically. They're absolutely out of control.